The children at the crossing. No one in town speaks about the accident if they can help it, but everyone knows the story. Decades ago, long before most of us were born, a school bus full of children stalled on the train tracks just outside town. The details vary depending on who's telling it. Some say the engine just wouldn't start. Others say the driver panicked, fumbled with the gear shift, wasted precious seconds that could have saved them all. But the only thing that really matters is what happened next. The train came, the horn blaring too late. The impact so violent that metal twisted like paper and bodies were flung like rag dolls. 27 children, all from the same elementary school, gone in an instant. The wreckage burned through the night, and by morning, nothing remained but debris and a few charred scraps of clothing scattered along the tracks. The town grieved, the parents shattered, the school closed for nearly a year, but life went on as it always does. And then, years later, the children came back. At first, it was barely noticeable. A mother found her son's homework neatly finished on the kitchen table, even though he swore he hadn't done it. A father discovered the weeds in his vegetable garden completely uprooted overnight. The soil freshly tilled, though no one in the family had touched it. A single mother came home from a double shift to find the trash taken out and the floors swept, even though her little boy was too young to do either. At first, people brushed it off. Forgetfulness, coincidence, maybe the kindness of a neighbor. But then the stories spread, and patterns began to emerge. The acts of kindness were always small, subtle, but they were too perfect. The handwriting on the homework looked like a child's, but not their child's. The chores were always done the way a child might do them, slightly uneven, a little clumsy, but full of effort. And sometimes, parents heard soft giggles in empty rooms, the scuff of tiny shoes on the floor when no one was there. It was the children, the ones from the bus. At first, people were afraid. Some moved away, unwilling to share their homes with unseen hands, too disturbed by the idea of ghostly little fingers tying their children's shoes or fixing their beds at night. But others, those who had lost their own children, or those who simply understood, welcomed them. They spoke to the empty air, left out extra plates at dinner, whispered thank you when the dishes were washed in the morning, though no one had done them. The ghost children didn't ask for anything in return. They only seemed to want comfort, to be near families, to belong again. But there was something else too, something sad, something aching. The ghost children were lonely. You could feel it in the way they lingered, the way they clung to the edges of rooms where the living children played. They never disrupted, never harmed, but they watched, always watching, longing. You could hear it in the whispers late at night, faint voices calling out names no one remembered. You could see it in the fogged-over windows on winter mornings, tiny handprints pressed against the glass as if someone had been looking out, waiting, hoping for someone to come back. They tried to play sometimes, but it was different. It wasn't laughter that filled the hallways in the dead of night. It was echoes of something that had once been laughter, something thin and distant, like the memory of a song. A mother once woke to find her daughter's dolls arranged in a perfect circle on the bedroom floor, as if for a tea party. Every single one had a tiny plate. Every single one had a cup filled with invisible tea. And just for a moment before the mother turned on the light, she swore she saw the faintest outline of small figures sitting among them. Heads bowed, hands in their laps, pretending. They pretended a lot, pretended to play, pretended to help, pretended to belong, but sometimes the sadness leaked through. There were stories of parents finding small, childlike shapes curled up at the foot of their beds at night, just watching. Not moving, just watching. One woman, whose own son had died young, woke to feel a light, cold weight pressing against her chest, the sensation of a tiny body burrowing against her as if seeking warmth. But when she opened her eyes, there was nothing but a faint impression on the blankets, as if something small had just been there. It was the worst for the children, the living ones. They spoke to them, the ghost children, not in full conversations, not in ways that could be understood, but in half-formed thoughts, in sudden ideas that weren't their own. A little girl once told her mother, "The boy with the striped shirt says your soup smells nice," but there was no boy with a striped shirt. Not anymore. Another child, 5 years old, asked her father if she could go outside and play. "The kids want me to come swing," she said, pointing toward the backyard. They've been waiting a long time. But the backyard was empty. The swing set hadn't moved. It was always small things, small moments, but no one in town doubted anymore. And then there was the train crossing. Some say the children return there at night, the ones who have nowhere else to go. If you drive past the old tracks after midnight, some claim you can hear them, whispering, calling out names, laughing in that thin, hollow way that isn't quite laughter anymore. Others say that if you stop your car near the tracks and put it in neutral, you'll feel it. A sudden push, as if a dozen tiny hands are trying to move you forward, away from danger, away from what happened to them. They don't want anyone else to suffer the way they did. Maybe they're trying to save us. Maybe they just want to feel needed again. Or maybe deep down they don't know they're gone. The flicker in the light. It started with a flicker. A single fluorescent light in the women's restroom on the 6th floor of the office building had been stuttering for days, its rhythmic pulse unnoticed by most, but enough to summon Henry Galloway, the maintenance electrician, to the scene. He had worked in this building for over a decade, fixing what needed fixing, keeping the unseen gears of the workplace turning. The women's restroom was empty when he entered, the stark scent of disinfectant masking whatever secrets its walls held. He set his toolkit down, unscrewed the panel on the ceiling, and reached up to remove the failing tube. That's when he saw it. Tucked into the shadows of the fixture, nearly invisible against the black wiring, was a small pinhole camera, its tiny lens pointing directly down at the stalls. Henry froze, heart knocking against his ribs. The implications hit him like a wave. Someone had put this here. Someone had been watching. His fingers trembled as he reached for it, peeling it away with slow, deliberate care. A tiny slot on the side contained a micro SD card. He hesitated. He should report it. That was the right thing to do. But something in him, some quiet, curious part, compelled him to slip it into his pocket instead. That night, in his small, dimly lit apartment, he inserted the card into his computer. A folder appeared, marked only with a date from weeks ago. He opened the first file. The footage was grainy, the distorted hum of white noise buzzing faintly beneath the silence. The camera had been placed directly above the toilets, capturing the most private moments of unsuspecting women. Henry felt disgust rise in his throat, a thick, oily revulsion. He should delete it. He should burn the card and pretend he never saw it. But something made him keep watching. The hours of footage blended together, countless women, their faces unaware, their trust shattered without their knowledge. But then, something changed. A new video. This one wasn't like the others. The restroom was dark, illuminated only by the weak glow of emergency lighting. A woman entered, moving strangely, her steps unsteady. Henry's breath hitched as he saw a second figure emerge from the shadows, someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone waiting. The woman never screamed. She barely had time. The struggle was quick, brutal, soundless except for the sharp crack of her skull against the tile. Henry recoiled, bile rising in his throat. The video continued. The shadowy figure lingered over her body, unmoving for a long time. Then finally he reached up, directly toward the camera, toward him, and covered the lens with a gloved hand. Henry slammed the laptop shut, his skin clammy with sweat. He had just witnessed a murder, a real, unreported crime. He should go to the police. He had evidence. But then a thought slithered into his mind. Unbidden, had the camera been his? The idea sank its claws into him, twisting deeper. He had stolen the card. No one knew he had it. If he reported it now, wouldn't that make him look guilty? His fingerprints were all over it. He was the only one who had found it. His hands shook as he pulled the card from the computer, staring at it like it was a live thing, something pulsing, something breathing. The decision settled over him like a fog. He would do nothing. He would say nothing. It wasn't his problem. The footage would stay hidden, but he couldn't unsee it. He couldn't unhear the quiet, final thud of the woman's skull against the cold, unyielding tile. Days passed. and the weight of the secret pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting. But something else had begun to change. When the call came that another light in the same restroom was flickering, Henry felt something unexpected: excitement. A reason to go back, a reason to check, to see if the cameras had been replaced. He found a second one tucked in a different fixture, identical to the first. The rush of discovery sent a shiver through him. This time he didn't hesitate. He pocketed the memory card before he even changed the light. The next night, the routine repeated. Alone in his darkened apartment, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face as he watched, and watched, and watched. The women blurred together, nameless, faceless. He told himself it was out of curiosity, out of concern, that he was keeping an eye on what was happening in that room. But a deeper part of him knew the truth. The third time, it wasn't just about checking the cameras. It was about replacing them, swapping the memory cards like clockwork, ensuring the cycle continued. He told himself he wasn't the one placing them, that he was merely maintaining them, keeping things in order, like he always did. No one suspected, no one questioned. He was the maintenance man, the fixer. He had access to everything. The power was intoxicating. The knowledge that he was the unseen watcher, the gatekeeper of secret lives. But then came the newest video, different from the rest. This time, it wasn't a woman. It wasn't even a victim. The camera feed showed an empty restroom for hours. Then, at precisely 3:07 a.m., movement. A figure stepped into view, tall, cloaked in shadow. He moved with eerie precision, as if he knew exactly where the camera was. He turned his head slightly, and Henry's breath caught in his throat. The man was wearing a mask, not a ski mask, not a balaclava, something different, something grotesque. A stretched, grinning face, frozen in a rictus smile. The figure tilted its head as if listening, as if aware. Then, slowly, he raised a single hand and pointed. Not at the camera, not at the stalls, at him, at Henry. The video ended. Henry stared at the screen, his mind unraveling. The apartment felt too quiet, too still. Then, tap, a sound from the hallway. Soft, deliberate. Tap, tap, closer. The light above his desk flickered, just once, and then it was gone. The apartment was bathed in darkness. Henry stumbled from his chair, heart racing, hand clutching the memory card like it might jump out of his palm. He fumbled to switch on the lamp, but the power was out. The silence felt too loud, too thick, as if it was pressing in on him. Then came another tap, this time louder, closer. There was a knock at the door, a single deliberate knock. He didn't move. His body froze. There was no one in the hallway. He was certain of it. He hadn't heard a door open. He hadn't heard footsteps. The hallway was dark. No one came up this late at night. The knocking persisted, slow, methodical. It was as if someone was waiting for him to react, to do something, anything. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The door creaked, not from the outside, but from the inside. Henry looked back over his shoulder, and a cold sweat dripped down his spine. The door to his closet was slightly ajar, the blackness behind it yawning wide, too wide. Who was in there? The thought was like a whisper, too quiet, too clear. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking was louder now, as if the sound was moving through the walls, inching closer with every passing second. Henry's pulse thrummed in his ears. His feet shuffled toward the closet, his breath ragged, his chest tightening. He reached out, hand trembling, to push the door open. Nothing. The closet was empty, but there was a feeling now, an oppressive weight in the air that hadn't been there before. The walls felt too close. The shadows in the corners felt too alive. Then he heard it, a whisper, low, raspy, like it was coming from the walls themselves. You watched, and now, you're mine. He spun around, heart hammering, but there was no one there. Nothing but the dark, the flicker of the light bulb above him, spinning wildly, out of control. The laughter came then, not from anywhere around him, but from within him. A laugh, soft, hollow, unfamiliar, as if he were already lost, as if he were already one of them. The lights went out. Henry returned to work the next morning, pale and unshaven, but a strange energy coursed through him. He hadn't slept, his mind too rattled to rest, but there was something else, something different. The whispering voice from last night still echoed in the back of his mind, but instead of fear, it had sparked a bizarre, undeniable hunger. He couldn't stop thinking about the cameras, about the footage, about the power, the knowledge that he had seen things no one else ever would. He started looking around the building differently, eyes flicking from hallway corners to ceilings, from light fixtures to security panels. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing what people were doing when they thought no one was watching. He could see everything. He could control it all. The first camera had been a mistake, he told himself, a one-off, a curiosity. But now, with the power of the footage in his hands, he couldn't resist. It was like an itch, one that only grew more unbearable the longer he ignored it. He found himself back in the same restroom that night, replacing the camera again, swapping the card without even needing to check the light. His motions were mechanical, practiced, but now a feeling of glee began to spread in his chest. He was no longer just maintaining the building, he was controlling it. But that wasn't enough. Henry's obsession grew. It consumed him. He started installing cameras everywhere, more restrooms, more hallways, the supply closet, even the stairwells. There was always something to fix, some new issue to address. Each time he'd leave a small, unnoticed camera behind, always in the shadows, always watching. He started to get careless. His mind, once sharp, began to dull under the weight of his addiction. He couldn't focus on anything other than the next video, the next glimpse of intimacy, of secrecy. The people who trusted him, who never knew he was watching, never knew he was controlling their every movement. By now, Henry had become a ghost in the building, a shadow who only appeared when something needed repairing, when someone was in the restroom or alone in the hallway. He was everywhere and yet nowhere. But the cameras weren't enough anymore. He needed more. He needed the thrill, the rush that came with the recordings. So, he installed cameras in places where no one would expect them. Back offices, the break room, even the cleaning closets where employees might change. He studied the footage obsessively, memorizing every detail of their lives, their conversations, their darkest, most private moments. He knew it all, and it was never enough.
I'm watching. I'm waiting. Emily had always been a light sleeper, but since her baby Oliver was born, sleep had become a luxury. Every little sound from the baby monitor jolted her awake. Every rustle, every tiny cry, every shifting breath. Her husband, Mark, could sleep through a thunderstorm, so it was always her creeping down the hall at odd hours, checking the crib, adjusting the blankets, whispering lullabies in the dark. The baby monitor was an old model, a hand-me-down from Mark's sister. It was simple, just audio, no video, just a small receiver that sat on her nightstand. She planned to replace it soon, get something modern, something with a screen. But that was before the voice. It started 3 nights ago. At first, she thought it was static. A faint whisper threaded through the white noise. Half asleep, she barely registered it. But then, through the haze of exhaustion, she realized it was speaking. A voice, faint, male. She sat up, pulse spiking, heart hammering in her chest. The voice was clear, but distant, as if coming from another room, another place. "He's beautiful." Emily's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the monitor. The nursery was dark. Oliver was alone. He will grow strong. He will be loved. But his path will not be easy. She couldn't move. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't cruel. But it wasn't human. She rushed to Oliver's room, throwing the door open, flipping on the light. He was asleep, tiny chest rising and falling, peaceful, undisturbed. She checked the closet, under the crib. The window was locked. There was no one there. For hours, she sat in the chair beside his crib, monitor in her lap, waiting, listening. But the voice never came back. The next day, she told Mark. He brushed it off. Baby monitors pick up weird frequencies sometimes, probably a neighbor's radio or something. She wanted to believe him. She tried, but deep down she knew. It wasn't a radio. That night, she barely slept, and when the whisper returned, she was awake to hear every word. "You have been given a gift, Emily. She covered her mouth, stifling a cry, a gift few will ever know. She reached for the power button on the monitor, but something stopped her, a weight in her chest, a terrible sick curiosity. "I will show you." The whisper faded into static, and then silence. The next morning, she checked her phone out of habit. The news app had an alert. A plane crash, a major disaster. The same flight she had planned to take next week to visit her sister, except she'd never booked the ticket. Something had told her to wait. The next night, the voice came back. "Tomorrow, you will receive a letter in the mail. Read it. Do not throw it away." Emily didn't want to believe it, but when she checked the mailbox the next morning, there it was, an envelope from a lawyer. An inheritance from a distant relative she barely remembered. A sum large enough to pay off every last debt. She didn't tell Mark. She didn't tell anyone. Days passed. She listened. The voice spoke. It warned her about things before they happened. A friend who would betray her trust. A reckless driver running a red light. A storm that would knock out power for 3 days. And then, one night, it gave her numbers. "Play them." Her fingers trembled as she wrote them down, but only for the child. Emily played the lottery the next morning, feeling like a fool, feeling sick, feeling watched. That night, the numbers were drawn. She won millions. Mark was ecstatic. Friends and family were stunned. The media wanted interviews. But Emily couldn't shake the cold fear wrapping around her spine, because she knew it wasn't luck. And then, just as she thought the voice had given her everything, it gave her something worse. The child will know pain and loss, but he will endure. He will survive. I will wait for him. When this life is done, he will find me, and we will be together. Emily clutched the monitor, her breath coming in short gasps. "I'm watching." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm waiting." The monitor clicked off. Silence. Emily never heard the voice again. She moved. She burned the monitor. She spent the money only on Oliver, never on herself, never on Mark. She obeyed, and still she never felt alone. Even now, years later, she watches him sleep, watches him grow, and sometimes, when the house is quiet and the world is still, she swears she feels something watching back.